Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Here's our feature subject tonight, when she was 9 years old.
We will now hear Baby Rose Marie, one of radio's youngest and hottest entertainers.
Oh, Jim is here and skies are clear and bright. Not for me, for I don't see the light. To hear the music of the birds in the tree start to speak and it sings. I know that I know it's spring.
That's right, our subject tonight is Rose Marie Mazzetta, but better known to everybody as Rose Marie, who died recently at the age of 94. And I was wrong if I said that Mickey Rooney had the longest career in show business. I think it's safe to say that Rose Marie had the longest career in show business. That recording was made when she was 9, but she was actually recording before that. Here's one that was made when she was 6.
Today's the girl next door to me. They fall around the Malibu house. I'm the one up there who thinks that I'm all set. You fight for her to care, baby boy, don't feel like that.
She actually recorded before that. When she was 3 years old, she recorded What Can I Say After I Say I'm Sorry. So by my count, that's over 90 years in show business, and not just in show business, but as a star. As a little girl, she was a huge vaudeville and radio star. I think she was the last survivor to have a hit record before World War II. She sang for a W.C. Fields movie. She sang for Al Capone, who loved her. Her father was a torch for Al Capone. A little later on, she sang for Bugsy Siegel at the Flamingo, when the Flamingo was opening in the 40s in Las Vegas. She appeared on Broadway with Phil Silvers, and of course she's most famous for her role as Sally Rogers in the Dick Van Dyke Show. Here's a little bit on Rose Marie's career from a recently released documentary by Jason Wise called Wait for Your Laugh.
It starts in the 1920s when a 4-year-old girl walked out on stage for the first time.
The minute she was born, the doctor slapped her and she started singing.
This is the story of the last 90 years of American entertainment through one person's eyes.
Nobody has ever had a life in show business like she has.
She was a star at 4, and one of the biggest stars in the country.
She was vaudeville. She was radio.
As big in radio as Shirley Temple was on film.
Paved her own way.
She was no pushover, that's for sure. Was she stubborn? Was she sweet all the time? Was she a pain in the ass? She was all of those things.
Rosemarie.
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 I was the first one to have a one-name thing. Now there's Cher, there's Liza, there's everything. I was the first one.
Rosemarie is the Forrest Gump of show business. She's been there for virtually every single step of how we entertain ourselves. From vaudeville to radio to film, Broadway, television to Vegas, nightclub performances, everything people now take for granted. Rosemarie was there, and she was there at the beginning.
Bugsy Siegel said, "We think you're wonderful. We want you to open in Vegas." I said, "What's Vegas?"
I met with Rosemarie and immediately felt a connection. We sat down for hours, and she gave me some of the most raw and intimate interviews about everything. What it was like to be one of the most famous child stars in history, what the Dick Van Dyke Show was really like, her mob connections.
Al Capone says, "Anything you need, anything you want, you call me Uncle Al from now on. We'll take care of her from here on in."
And her tragic and beautiful love story with famed trumpet player Bobby Guy.
She was going through the worst experience anyone can go through.
I talked to Tim Conway, who she discovered in Cleveland.
If it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here.
Peter Marshall, who worked on Hollywood Squares with Rosemarie for years.
According to Dear Abby, is there a law that can force a man to marry a woman?
Yes, and I think it's called a mother-in-law.
Just fun. It was like a party.
Then I interviewed Dick Van Dyke and Carl Reiner.
I learned comedy from Rosemarie. Mary and Rosie hardly ever talked. And I guess Carl had to sit her down. I used real strong language. As you both have beautiful legs, they want to look at her legs.
Well, we're going to concentrate on the Dick Van Dyke Show, which is what Rosemarie is best known for. You didn't hear too much about that feud between Mary Tyler Moore And Rose Marie, back in the day, and you didn't hear much about it when Mary Tyler Moore died. I'd like to know more about it, but as best I can ascertain, you had Rose Marie, who'd already been a star in show business for 35 years, and originally she was supposed to be the female lead. And he had Mary Tyler Moore, who was the up-and-coming feature player who had great chemistry on the set with Dick Van Dyke, so they decided to make her the star. So this didn't travel too well with Rose Marie, and I'm not sure that it traveled too well with Mary Tyler Moore either. Mary hung around with the younger people on the set. Rose Marie hung around with the older people on the set. I'm not sure Mary Tyler Moore was the angel that a lot of people portrayed her as. In any event, getting back to Rose Marie, the Dick Van Dyke Show was supposed to be a rough model of Sid Caesar's show. And Rose Marie was hired to be the sort of Selma Diamond character who along with Louise Callan, was one of the real-life writers for Sid Caesar. Here's how she got the job, courtesy of Danny Thomas, Carl Reiner, and Sheldon Leonard.
I was very friendly with Danny Thomas. I had worked with him in New York when he came from Chicago as a great white New Hope comic from Chicago, and he opened at the Martinique in New York, and I was his opening act. And we became very good friends. His wife's name is Rose Marie, too. He always thought I was a great performer, and he always liked the way I worked and all this and all that. So when we came out here, I said, when am I going to do your show? He said, oh, you'll do the show, don't worry, because he had a big hit show, and I wanted to do it, and I was doing a lot of television then. They would come to see me in Vegas, he and his wife, and Sheldon and his wife would come. And in fact, Sheldon was kind of like my mentor. He was wonderful. He and Danny, both. They would come and say, don't you ever die on stage? And I go, not if I can help it, And I said, when am I going to do your show? He said, oh, your time will come, your time will come. Okay. So I get a call one day, and they said, go to Desi Lou, Danny Thomas' office. I said, oh, I'm going to do the show. She said, no. She said, this is for the new show, Dick Van Dyke. I said, what's a Dick Van Dyke? They'll tell you when you get there. So I arrive, and Carl Reiner is there, and Sheldon, and Danny, and I didn't have to read or anything. The part was mine. And I said, who have you got to the third writer? They said they haven't decided yet. I said, what about Maury Amsterdam? Now, I've known Maury since I was 11 years old. I met him when I first came out to the coast here to do the Al Pierce show. He was on the Al Pierce show as a regular. Then, when I went back to New York, he was living in Yonkers. We'd see one another, here and there, and had dinner and all this kind of stuff. And so we were very friendly. And I said, why don't you call Maury Amsterdam? They said, do you know where he is? I said, he lives in Yonkers. So they called him, and I called him, and I said, they're going to call you about a new show called The Dick Van Dyke Show. And he said, what's a Dick Van Dyke? I said, I don't know, but we'll find out. And he said, I'll be out Monday. He came out Monday, and they signed him, and we were all set. So I helped Maury get the job on The Dick Van Dyke Show.
Here she talks about the role of Sally Rogers.
I played Sally Rogers, who was one of the writers of the show. One of the writers of the Alan Brady Show, which is who we wrote for. Dick was head writer, and Maury was another writer, and I was the other writer. I was not a secretary. I was a writer. In fact, I was the first women's lib part that was ever on television. I made the same money the boys made. We were all equal, and I was a writer. I was not a secretary. I think Carl tried to pattern me after Selma Diamond, who was a writer on the Sid Caesar show. But my own personality came out, and I think he just wrote for that. I just played me, really. That's a secret I won't tell you about. I started wearing the hairball on that show, and I've worn it ever since. And as Vincent Price once said, it's nailed into her head. Sally Rogers' love life was very sad. She went with Herman Glimcher, whose mother was a pain in the neck. That was her boyfriend. She was always looking for a guy to get married. That part of it was Selma. Selma was always looking for a guy. Sally was just looking for a man, and not desperately, but funnily enough, as they say. And Herman Glimcher filled that bill whenever she needed somebody to go out with. And I've had people say because of me, they've become writers. They figured I was the first women's lib, that equal pay, equal this, equal that, So, okay, fine.
I'm only going to play you one segment from the Dick Van Dyke Show, but it's a real rarity. Nobody else will play this one. It's an episode where Rob thinks that someone stole his watch, and his insurance man suspects Buddy or Sally. Dick Van Dyke forgets the character for a second and calls Sally Rogers Roe, and they either didn't catch it or didn't trim it. Someone said on a blog this didn't happen, but here it is.
Gang, what's a good word?
Well, let's see. How does Fink grab you?
Fink? Come on, Sal. Sit down. Be uncomfortable. What are you two guys all steamed up about? Go ahead. Tell him.
I would if I was talking to him.
Why aren't you talking to him? Because we're talking to that clown from the insurance company. What clown? Big chief knife in the back. Or hatchet man, Mr. Evans.
Evans questioned you guys.
Would you like to see the bamboo shoots under my fingernail? Oh, I was so mad I didn't even ask that rat if he was single.
Why did he have to do that?
What do you got planned for your guest next time, Rob? Malaria?
You don't think I asked Evans to question you, do you?
Oh, no, he just picked our names at random out of the phone book.
Look, I am not accusing any of the suspects. Oh.
Boy, we got a nasty word for people who are suspicious like you.
Yeah. What is it?
Suspicious.
That's not so nasty.
You're right, it needs work.
Oh, wrong. You don't think for a minute I'd suspect you.
Oh, I don't think for a minute. I've only been thinking it the past 12 hours.
A little unintentional fourth wall. Well, Rosemarie had quite a career. She was quite a performer. And she did a lot of that Dick Van Dyke after her husband died suddenly and she wanted to give up the show. And we're going to give the last word to her via Sheldon Leonard and Carl Reiner.
One of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten was Carl told me that Sheldon said to him, "You want the best for this part? Get Rosemarie." And then after the show was over, Carl sent me a wire and he said Sheldon was right. It's one of my prized possessions.
I want to move on now to another longtime entertainer, Frank Buxton, who died recently at the age of 87. He wasn't in the business as long as Rosemarie, but he was a writer, voiceover man, actor, jack of all trades, and a ubiquitous personality on television in the 60s and early 70s. Frank came out of Northwestern, have to give my school its props. He's best known for hosting the children's educational show Discovery in the mid-60s.
Discovery 66, the award-winning program for young people with Frank Buxton and Virginia Gibson. Today, Discovery goes to Israel.
Hi, welcome to Discovery. Today on our Around the World trip, Ginny and I have come to one of the most exciting and one of the newest countries in the world, the state of Israel.
It is a new country, Frank, only 18 years old. And yet everywhere you see names and places that sound like pages out of the Bible. Jerusalem, Mount Zion, over there, Tiberias, Nazareth just beyond.
Well, Ginny, the names and places and many of the traditions are ancient. But the spirit we're going to look at today is brand new.
He did the voice of Badfink, which was a fairly popular children's cartoon back in the day as well.
A hotline. Badfink here. Badfink, we need you at your museum right away. The priceless pink pearl of Persia has disappeared. All right, Chief. I'll be over before you can say Jack Robinson.
He hosted a short-lived game show in the mid-60s called Get the Message, but he was also an expert on old-time radio, and Johnny Carson used to have him on The Tonight Show to tell stories about old-time radio.
One story about the Lone Ranger that I really love. Do you remember the guy who at the end of the thing used to say,
"You mean you don't know who that masked man was?" That man was the Lone Ranger.
And he'd ride off that high silver, right? So one night, they get to the end of the thing. The director comes out there 30 seconds before the next rebroadcast, right? The director comes running out and he says, "Listen, you've got to give this more conviction. There's an important man, the Lone Ranger. When you say, you know, a man was the Lone Ranger, you've got to give it. Think of somebody important. Think of, you know, somebody like the President of the United States. Just something like that." They start the show again. They come around to the second time around. They come up to that line and he says,
"You mean you don't know who that masked man was?" Well, that man was Herbert Hoover.
I also mentioned that Frank Buxton was a television writer. He wrote the legendary Password episode of The Odd Couple with this classic scene.
Now listen, no more Greek clues. Aristophanes is ridiculous.
Stand by.
Okay, back to the game. And the word goes to Oscar Madison, Betty White with a score of 17-0. This is the word.
The password is ridiculous.
All right. Oscar, you have the option. Pass or play.
I want to play, Alan. Now, Aristophanes. Ridiculous.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close tonight with a brief mention of mystery writer Sue Grafton, who died recently at the age of 77. Her female detective, Kinsey Milhone, solved crimes through an alphabetical series of adventures, starting with A for Alibi, and the last one was Y is for Yesterday. So in tribute to Sue Grafton, we're going to play the alphabet song. It's been done by a lot of people, from Perry Como to Dean Martin, but the best version was done by the underrated John Gary. What a beautiful voice he has. Here he is with A, You're Adorable.
A, you're adorable. B, you're so beautiful. C, you're a cutie full of charm. D, you're a darling. And E, you're exciting. And F, you're a feather in my arm. G, you look good to me. H, you're so heavenly. I, you're the one I idolize. J, we're like Jack and Jill. K, you're so kissable. L is the love light in your eye.